for the first decade or two at the comic book company, we never received fan mail. And I was sure these books are being published and destroyed somewhere, and that's the end of it. All of a sudden, the Fantastic Four came out. Oh, well, I'm exaggerating. About once a year, we'd get a letter. Somebody would write, "Hey, I bought one of your books and there's a staple missing. I want my money back." You know, I would run through the office waving this letter. "We got a fan letter!" Hang it up on the bulletin board. We'd write to the guy, "Thanks for your letter. Hope we hear from you again." But all of a sudden, with the Fantastic Four, we really got mail. We really had readers who said something. You know, "I like this, I don't like that," and so forth. We also tried not to have every story have a happy ending. Occasionally, we started cliffhanger endings. You didn't know what would happen. Continued stories. They had never had those in the comics. Now, everybody thought, hey, we're being pretty clever with these continued stories. They didn't know the truth. The truth of the matter was, I was writing so many books, it was hard to think of plots. If you have a continued story, you're using one plot for a few months, it makes it easier for you. You know, you stretch it out. But that's just between us. All right, let me see. Well, a little bit longer. Let's see, I told you about the bug-eyed monster. I told you about the adult vocabulary, my background. Well, you don't care about that. Okay, after Fantastic Four, drunk with power at having had this tremendous literary success, said, all right, we'll bring out another one. So I figured now, obviously, things that are offbeat seem to work. And I love things that are offbeat myself, but I never dared do that before because it never occurred to me that anything I like, you know, would possibly please a public. In fact, let me give you one of life's great lessons that I have learned. And I think this will apply in almost any artistic field and maybe in others. I think the one way to become a success at something, or at least the one way to have a better chance, is don't try too much to please the public. Don't try to please a certain segment of the public. Don't try to please them, because you don't really know them. Nobody knows them, but you know yourself. Try to please yourself. At least that's what happened to us at Marvel. We started writing stories that amused us. We started saying, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we, you know, had a green-skinned monster and we call him the Hulk? Wow, you know. And we forgot about the audience. We forgot about the public. We suddenly started having fun, the artists and me. Wouldn't it be fun? We'll get some nut called Spider-Man and he climbs on walls, and how does he become Spider-Man? Hey, how about he gets bitten by a radioactive spider? Ha ha ha, you know. And we got a kick out of it. Well, so what I'm trying to say is, I think if you do things that you really like, none of us, I hate to say this, especially for myself, but apparently none of us are that unique. Here, I thought I was an original, only one of a kind, and I'm doing stories I like, and suddenly we're getting millions of readers, so there must be millions of crazy people somewhere who have the same sort of taste I do. So this is something you might mull over and discuss in your philosophy classes, and write me poison pen letters when you prove that I'm wrong. Anyway, so we came out with the Hulk, and the Hulk is a very extraordinary character because I called him Bruce Banner in his normal identity when he's not hulking around the place. He was Dr. Bruce Banner. Now, there's a guy on television I knew slightly, a producer called Bob Banner, and I had to write very fast because it was like, it was a production line at Marvel. Sometimes I'd be typing quickly, and carelessly, I know Bob Banner, and I'd call him Bob Banner instead of Bruce Banner. The story would go out that way. We couldn't afford proofreaders in those days. And I'd get fan mail, hate mail, whatever it is, from readers. Hey, what's the matter with you, you idiot? Don't even know the name of your own character. Last month he was Bruce Banner. This month he's Bob Banner. What's his name? As usual, I took the cowardly way out, and I would answer these letters by saying it should be apparent to any discerning reader the man's name is Robert Bruce Banner. which was okay when I could remember that. But what happened is today, uh, Universal Studios just completed a television show. Some of you may have seen it, a 2-hour Hulk movie, which they expect to be the forerunner of a series which will change the whole concept of American entertainment. Um, Not only did I have trouble with the name, but when the thing was being filmed, they asked me to come out and look at it. I don't know why, because they wouldn't listen to anything I said. But anyway, I got out there, and they're calling him David. I said, his name is Bruce. They said, Bruce has a bad connotation in Hollywood. Okay, I could live with that, but I said, how about Bob? No, we think David is good. So all of a sudden, I became every inch the publisher, and I said, well, you can't do it. I won't let you. He's our character. He's got to be called by his right name. And they said, Stan, it's already on film. It represents a $1 million investment. Are you suggesting we do it over? Well, I'm the kind of guy who is awed by the thought of $1 million. And I said, so what's so bad about David? Who's gonna care, you know? Anyway, they promised. There was a scene at the end where you see his tombstone, but for those of you who didn't see it, don't worry. He doesn't really die. It's a very metaphysical type of thing. Anyway, and on the tombstone, oh my God, I can't remember. They either wrote David Bruce Banner or David Bob Banner or Bob David Banner, but they did that to pacify me. They gave him one of his real names as the middle name, and when they do the next film, we'll start fighting all over again. But anyway, of all the things you can say about the Hulk, this sticks in my mind. Why can nobody get his name straight? After the Hulk, I wanted to do another superhero, so I thought of Spider-Man. Now, one reason was, as a kid, I had loved a pulp magazine named The Spider. I was very young and probably very stupid, and to me, the most dramatic thing I could think of, the cover of this magazine, the series of magazines, was like The Shadow, but not as famous. It said, The Spider, and underneath it, Master of Men. Somehow, to me, at the age of 9, The Spider, Master of Men. Oh, I'd love to be who wouldn't want to be a Master of Men? And he had a ring, and he'd punch a bad guy in the face, and it had a little spider thing on the ring, and it would leave a spider mark on the guy's jaw. I mean, next to Shakespeare. So when I was looking around for a character, I felt, gee, I've always kind of liked the Spider. Why don't I get a guy and call him Spider-Man? So I presented that to my publisher, who, as you may have gathered by now, is a model of erudition. And he said, nah, nobody likes spiders. That's no good. So I said, well, it's not a case of people liking spiders, but remember, there used to be a green hornet. I don't think people are turned on to hornets, but nah, I don't like it, forget it. Anyway, I couldn't get him to advance the funds to put out this book, so finally we introduced Spider-Man in another magazine called Amazing Adult Stories, which we were going to kill. The book was dying, and in the last issue of that book, when we were about to kill it off, just to get it out of my system, I threw the Spider-Man story in. We got our sales figures later, and it was the best-selling book we had ever had. And we made it into a series, and a few months later, my publisher came to me and said, hey, Stan, Spider-Man, best idea I ever had. That was it. Anyway, he worked out pretty good. He became the best-selling comic we ever had, and I might add, the best-selling superhero in the world today. Well, this is, I could go on. We have 50 characters. I don't want to bore you with all of them. Let's see if there's something else we can talk about. During the questions and answers period, if you are injudicious enough to want to ask about some specific character, want to hear me fumble my way through it, not knowing the answer, you get your chance at that time. One thing we tried was, we were the first company, I guess, to give screen credits. Before Marvel, everybody was anonymous. That was just the name of the story. And I figured it would be sort of fun to say written by, drawn by, edited by, lettered by, colored by. But that I thought would be a little dull, so I made up little nicknames. Whatever was onomatopoetic or alliterative. And I'd say, since my name began with S, I'd say written by Smilin' Stan Lee, I walked around all day frowning, but it didn't matter, And drawn by Jolly Jack Kirby, the biggest grouch who ever lived, but who knew? So we started having fun with nicknames. There was an artist named Dick Ayers. I don't know why, but Dick, I ran out of words beginning with D. There was a dashing Don Heck and daring somebody else. I ran out of it. So I called him Darlin' Dick Ayers. I thought he'd get angry at me, it sounded a little effeminate or something. He loved it. He said, Stan, my wife calls me Darlin' Dick now. My kids call me. He said, you've given me a whole personality. So, it shows what these things could do. Anyway, it caused a lot of trouble because until the nickname and the credit time came around, our artists and writers had been very easy guys to deal with. All of a sudden, they became stars. Had to talk to them in a certain way. Would you bring my fan mail to my desk this morning, please? To the girl. And just a moment, his name was lettered a little larger than mine. I'd like that changed. I want my name above his name. You'd think you're in Hollywood. But it did make life interesting. Miserable, but interesting. Have I told you about the Comic Code Authority? Well, in the words of Mark Antony as he stood over Brutus's corpse, if you have tears to shed, prepare to shed them now. The Comics Code Authority was set up for a good and valid reason. Years and years ago, a psychiatrist named Dr. Frederick Wortham felt that comics were too violent, sexy, and sadistic, and were ruining the moral fiber of America and the entire human race, I'm sure. And, the comic book publishers, in their infinite wisdom and greed and selfishness, said, we'll form a self-censorship body and nobody can criticize us. So they set up this code authority which reviews all the books. And very seriously, although there's absolutely no reason to be serious, they do a fairly good job. They make sure the books are not too sexy or violent, which they wouldn't be even without the authority, because nobody's particularly trying to make them sexy or violent. We just, at least at Marvel, we just want to make them fun. But I want to tell you one story that I always thought was kind of funny about the code, to show you how it's possible to be overzealous sometimes. We were doing a Western book years ago. I think it was called Kid Colt Outlaw. Again, we got in a rut due to my publisher, who loved Western characters named Kid. He once had a character called Kid Colt. Was the first, and it sold well. And he had the kind of mind, if Kid Colt sold well, the readers must love cowboys named Kid. So there was a time we had Kid Colt, we had the Kid from Texas, we had the Nevada Kid, we had the Montana Kid, the South Dakota Kid. I mean, any state we could think of was a new character. Anyway, with Kid Colt, we sent a page to the authority with all the other books, and this page came back marked rejected. This didn't happen too often, so I wondered what was wrong. They showed me the page. I couldn't find anything. It was just it was 6 panels, typical Western story. Kid Colt is being threatened by a gunman, an outlaw, and he draws his gun and he shoots the gun out of the gunman's hand. The bullet doesn't hit the gunman. Nobody even says ouch. Just shoots the gun out of his hand. And I looked at the note that the Code Authority had sent, and it said that they objected to panel number 5. Panel number 5 was the panel that shows Kid Colt shooting his gun, and this was the picture. You know the way you draw a gun in comics, a fella shooting it in profile. This was the gun, his hand was holding the trigger, Here's the gun, and the bullet was he had just shot the gun, so the bullet was going out, the trajectory indicated by a straight line, with a little puff of smoke around it to show that the bullet had just been ejected. I called the people at the Code and I said, what is wrong with that drawing? They said, it's too violent. The puff of smoke is too big. I swear. Well, I know you're all concerned, and nobody wants to disseminate and spread violence, so you'll be happy to hear that we used white paint and we whited out the puff of smoke and we redrew it smaller. Sent it back to the code authority, they approved it, and today the youth of America is secure. Yes, I thought you'd appreciate that. Let me see. Shall I tell you a little bit, a very little bit, because it can get dull, even duller than what you've been hearing, about the way we write and draw these strips. Years ago, comic books were written very much the way a play is written. The writer would write stage directions for the artist. In other words, in a play, the first page would read Act 1, Scene 1, and it would describe the set, and then it would say that the star enters from stage left and he does so and so. Well, in a comic book, we would write Page 1, Panel 1. Spider-Man enters from the left side of the panel and he jumps out of a window or whatever he's doing. Very much like a play, and then the dialogue would be put in. Now, in the beginning at Marvel, for some reason that totally escapes me now, I was writing just about all the stories, and fast and magnificent as I may have been, I was not able to really keep up as we kept adding book after book. I couldn't keep up with all the artists. Now, the artists were all freelancers, which meant they weren't on salary, but they just got paid for what they did. And if a guy didn't have a script to draw, he wasn't getting paid. And I couldn't let these people be without a script because they needed the money. So I'd be writing a script, let's say, for Jack Kirby. Suddenly Steve Ditko would walk in and he'd say, "Hey, Stan, I finished my last job. I need another one." But I wasn't able to write another one for Steve at the moment because I hadn't finished Jack's. But I couldn't leave Steve with nothing to do. He'd have no income for that day or 2 days. So out of sheer desperation, I said to him, "Look, Steve, I tell you what, I haven't got a script to give you, but I know you want to work. So let me just give you a plot of what the next story will be. You go on home and draw it any way you want. Just follow the plot generally the way I tell you about it. Bring it in to me, and I'll put in the dialogue and the captions." And he grumbled something. Off he went. He'd come back a few days later with it all drawn. By then I had finished Jack's script. Or if I hadn't finished, it didn't matter. I could put the artwork aside. And when I got to it, I would go through it and add the dialogue and captions. It started as an emergency measure, but I began to realize this is a great way to do it. Because instead of the writer telling the artist what to draw, all the writer does is give the artist the broad outline of what the strip is, and the artist now goes home and draws what he thinks are the most exciting panels to illustrate that story. Now, who'd be a better judge than the artist? He's the guy who has to draw it, and he knows what he draws best. I, as the writer, if I'm trying to think of dialogue, and I don't have artwork, I'm just doing it as a script, I'm looking at a blank piece of paper, and it's sort of hard to visualize what a character would say. But if I'm looking at a drawing where Captain America is going, I know the dialogue is, "Oh!" So I think it gave us much better stories, and it enabled me to keep any number of artists busy at the same time. I was just tossing out plots like confetti, never could remember what they were later. The artwork would come in. It was like doing a crossword puzzle. I didn't remember the plot. I didn't care. But it was fun to sit down and take all that garbage and make a story out of it, you know? And that's the way we presently work at Marvel. It's hard to believe, but nobody knows what anybody's doing. The writer tells the artist a plot, proceeds to forget about it. The artist does it any way he wants, changes it all around anyway, brings it into the writer, who is totally staggered by what he sees, and creates a whole new story writing it. But I think it gives the stories a feeling of freshness and unexpectedness, as well as a feeling of total inanity. And that is the way. Now, let me tell you a little about pencilers, inkers, and letters and stuff, because I've got another few minutes. First of all, the writer comes up with the plot, gives it to the penciler Now, he's the original creative artist. He's the one who illustrates the strip. He does it in pencil. Then the writer gets the artwork and puts a sheet of paper in a typewriter, types out all the dialogue, and indicates on the artwork where the dialogue balloons will go. This is a science in itself. You see, the right way to do it, they're supposed to do it this way. If an illustration is exciting, there should be as little dialogue as possible. If an illustration is dull, that's where the writer should put in a lot of dialogue, a lot of captions, a lot of sound effects to jazz it up. So the writer really has to have a feeling for layout and for artwork also. Anyway, okay, now the writer has typed up the script and we have the pencil drawings. It goes to a letterer who letters the dialogue in very carefully and legibly so you won't strain your little pink eyes. And then it goes to the inker who inks or traces over the pencil drawings with India ink because the engraver's camera needs jet black ink to photograph the stuff. Now, the inker is actually more than just a tracer. A good inker can take weak artwork and make it look much better than it is. A bad inker can take good artwork and totally ruin it. So even though they don't do the original concept, the inkers are quite important. It then should, if we have time and if we happen to have one on staff, go to an editor or a proofreader who checks the work out, and then we shoot photostats of the pages, and these stats are colored by a colorist. The original artwork plus the colored stats are sent to the engraver, and he makes the color plates using the colored photostats as a guide. That is all. I don't know what happens after that. Your guess is as good as mine. It goes to a printer who does something, and he sends it to wholesalers in different cities, and they send it to the stores who bury them and tear them and don't sell them on time, and everything is botched up. Someday I'm going to try to get a handle on that. But anyway, you now know all the intricacies of how it's produced. Utter abject confusion. Now, there's a lot more I can say.